Hello and welcome to our hashtag My First Time debate, where we're going to be speaking to the candidates standing for different parties in Sunderland. My name is Daniel Hordon.
And my name is Keith Beers, and we've been asking you about the issues you want us to cover. From our poll, we now know that the top 4 topics our audience want us to talk about are mental health and the NHS, housing, the environment and transport, and finally Brexit. I'll be putting these questions to our panel about all of these topics.
So let's kick things off with a 1-minute opening statement from each of our candidates today. If you could introduce yourselves first and why you are standing for election. We'll start with Christopher.
Hello, I'm Christopher Howarth. I'm standing for the Conservative Party in Hordon and Sunderland South. There are 2 real reasons why I'm standing here. Firstly, my family come from Sunderland, a few hundred yards away from here. My grandfather ran a glass factory, and I'm very proud of our history in Sunderland, and a lot of it's in the National Glass Centre nearby. The second main reason is because we all watched the iconic result in 2016 when Sunderland voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union, yet for 3 years we've seen a logjam and we're still in the European Union. And the reason for this is because MPs in Parliament, having promised to hand over the choice to the British people to leave the European Union, have voted consistently against it in Parliament, including the Labour candidate who is unfortunately not here today to explain why. So,
Okay, that's your time up. If we could move down the line, Stephen.
Hi, I'm not standing in this election, but a friend of mine is. He can't be here today because of work trouble. However, voting for a Liberal Democrat is voting for change. It's change in the city, locally, change in Parliament. We don't need the same old system, what is broken. We need a new system, STV, something similar like that, what will promote more diversity of thought, more people in Parliament. Not only that, we're the only UK-wide party, I understand the Greens are here, but only UK-wide party challenging the dogma of Brexit. It is a bad decision for this country to leave the European Union. We have seen that the IFS and other institutions have stated that it will damage constituencies like this. Constituencies I live in, people I represent on the council will be hurt. Jobs are at risk, and there's also the looming factor of the NHS being up for sale by the Conservative Party, and we're one of the only parties offering a penny in the pound of income tax.
That's your time up. Kevin, you?
I'm standing sorry, I've got to introduce myself. My name's Kevin Yuill, and I'm standing for the Brexit Party for Houghton and Sunderland South. And I'm standing because I'm angry. I'm not a politician. I haven't been a politician up until now. And I think that the votes of 17.4 million people in the biggest mandate that in British history should be honoured, and I'm angry that they're not honoured, and I want to stand to make sure that the 62.4% of the population of this constituency actually are represented. And we've seen that the Labour Party, who was in power in this constituency, has continuously ignored and done everything it can to stop the Brexit from happening. And we can see that there's a sort of unholy alliance of parties that wish to stop Brexit, and I want to put a stop to that, and I think the people who have voted should have their wishes respected. So I'm here for democracy.
Okay, and finally Richard.
Thank you. My name's Richard Bradley, and I'm the Green Party candidate. And I can remember talking to my daughter when she was young about climate change and how if our generation didn't act, it would affect her generation in later life. My daughter's only 22, and we're suffering the consequences of climate emergency now. The only thing the scientists got wrong was the speed and severity of scale of change in the climate. In my daughter's lifetime, in 22 years, we've lost 70% of the Arctic ice. Glaciers in Iceland, in Scandinavia, in the Alps have melted. This year alone, we've got forest fires in Australia, in Africa, in the Amazon, in California, in Siberia. The Siberian fire didn't even make the news in Britain, but the plume of smoke covered an area the size of Europe. Now, we've not just been the canaries in the coal mine warning about what's to come. We've been working on this for 10 years. So our Green New Deal has a plan both to deal with the climate emergency and change society for the better.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today and representing your respective parties. Now, Labour and UKIP were both invited to the debate, but were unable to attend. So we'll set out their stance on each topic when we cover it.
So for each question, we've assigned a time limit to make sure you get through everything within the hour. We will state whether a question has a 1 minute or a 2 minute time limit, or if it will be a yes or no answer. You will then each have a set amount of time to give your answer. We've conducted a poll on our Twitter page and we have prioritised our topics from that. Apologies in advance for interrupting you, but we are on a time limit, so if you do run over, we will interrupt you.
Okay, so our first topic to cover today is going to be the mental health problem and the NHS, which was our top scoring topic in our poll. The Labour position on this topic is that they've pledged £845 million to improve children's mental health services. They plan to create 300,000 mental health hubs and increase spending in the health sector by 4.3%. They also want to end same-sex wards, ensure that the NHS becomes net zero carbon neutral by the end of a certain time period, and they also want minimum standards on food in hospitals and a scrappage of car parking charges in hospitals.
And UKIP have pledged to increase mental health funding by £500 million per year and plan to bring in policies that they describe as practical without going into too much detail. And where possible, UKIP plan to scrap car parking charges. They also plan to scrap tuition fees for nurses as long as the nurses give a 5-year commitment to work within the NHS.
So for your first question, we're going to set a 1 minute time limit. The NHS is massively understaffed, and the number of nurses coming to the UK from the EU fell by 87% to just 800 in the year 2017 to 18 on the year before. How do you plan to recruit more nurses into the NHS and retain those nurses? And we'll start with you, Christopher, on the end.
Investment in public services is only possible if you have a strong economy. Delivering Brexit and moving on to sorting out the economy underpins all the investment we can do in public services. As a part of that, Boris Johnson has pledged to spend £33.9 billion extra on the NHS to invest in public services to improve the standards we all want to see. Of that, recruitment in nurses and doctors is a key part. And there's two ways to increase the number of nurses and doctors. Firstly, it's to recruit new nurses and doctors, and the second is to reduce the number that leave the service. As a part of that, nurses, the Conservatives have pledged to increase the current level of 280,000 up to 330,000, so it's an increase of 50,000, which has to be done by a mix of better retention and better recruitment. It takes a long time to recruit.
That 50,000 figure quickly, that isn't quite true, is it? Because nearly 20,000 of those nurses are nurses who are already in the NHS. So is that actually going to be a 50,000 increase?
It is a 50,000 increase because, of course, the two ways, it's retention and it's recruitment. So, of course, you're not looking at sort of new nurses, old nurses. If you keep a nurse, if you manage to persuade a nurse to stay longer in the NHS, that is part of the increase.
How is that more nurses?
What?
How is that more nurses? If you're persuading them to stay, is that actually more?
Because if a nurse is going to leave the NHS and you persuade them to stay, and you're recruiting more, that's a double hit. You gives you the ability to increase the numbers up to 330,000. So it's a mixture of different policies to get there.
Richard Bradley, we'll come to you next.
For too long, the NHS has been a political football, and these guys kick it round amongst themselves, and we need to take the NHS out of politics. Yes, it needs funding properly. The Green Party plan has £7 billion additional funding a year into the NHS, but prevention is better than cure. We live in the 21st century, and something is wrong in society where we have more and more people putting demands on the NHS, and it's time we started looking at society to make people healthier. We have a problem with obesity, we have a problem with mental health illness, we have a problem with growing number of allergies, with diabetes. Changes in the way of life can improve, can reduce the number of people going to the NHS, and then actually they can afford to deal with the people who are poorly. So introducing something like a universal basic income, giving everybody a guaranteed income so that they have a safety net, working towards a 4-day working week to balance the work-life balance, and to improve walking, cycling, etc., will reduce the cost on the NHS.
Okay, Kevin Yuill, can we come to you next?
Yes, I have some sympathy for that. I do think that the NHS is used as a political football. We don't hear about it very often until just before an election, and suddenly it's the stick that the Labour Party brings out to beat everybody else with. It's the NHS, NHS, NHS. Having said that, it has been massively underfunded, and it's very obvious that when you go to the hospitals how ridiculously underfunded it is. There's a horrific waiting time. We don't, in the Brexit Party, make these election pledges that are immediately broken. This is one of the problems. This is what I'm not a politician, and one of the things that enrages me about politics is there's forever all of these promises that we're given and then are simply completely forgotten about once everybody's elected. Obviously, we all have an interest in keeping the NHS. I can just give you a guarantee that I am committed to a publicly owned NHS, and I will certainly not vote for any privatisation whatsoever.
Okay, Stephen O'Brien, you and Ellie laughing there.
His party leader believes in privatisation. His party leader has stated that he wants to move people onto a private healthcare system.
And more recently, he stated that he will not.
He's changed his tune from when he said that. I mean, you've got the Brexit Party of the left of me, what should really be of the right of me, and you've got the Tories on the right, who in secret documents want to privatise the NHS.
That's rubbish.
I mean, if you look at the Liberal Democrat view, it's simple. We want a penny on the pound in the income tax, which is 7 billion a year, 35 billion over 5 years, extra funding into the NHS. You tackle mental health by getting to the root cause of it.
What about recruiting and retaining more nurses, though? Going back to the initial question.
The recruitment issue is fundamental, because we've lost I think last year was a whole load of nurses from the EU, and that's probably based on the xenophobia and what's being driven up by this referenda. I mean, if you go back to the mental health issue, where we can tackle it by having it parity with physical health, by stopping locking up people.
We're going to come on to mental health next, if you want to hold on a second on that thought, okay?
Yeah, if I can, gentlemen, just ask you a 2-minute question this time. So mental health in young people is at its worst level it's ever been. According to CAMHS, the Young People's Mental Health Service, the average waiting time for children and young people to access mental health services ranges from 14 to 200 days. What will your party do to fix the mental health crisis? If I can just come to Christopher Howarth first, please.
So out of the £33.9 billion pledged for the NHS, £2 billion of that is to go to mental health, which is a sort of an unseen sort of disease within society, because it has no sort of obvious visible signs. So broken legs and normal disease, there's an obvious sign. Mental health, for too long it's been unseen, but the consequences of it can be incredibly tragic. So awareness, funding, making sure people in all parts of society can identify it, and then having a good system so that once it is identified, there are qualified people within the NHS to treat it just as you would any other sort of ailment or disease.
What about those waiting times, though? Under the current Conservative government, those 14 to 200 day waiting times exist. So how is re-electing the Conservatives going to change that?
Waiting times are too long, which is why the Conservative government is pledged to increase the number of nurses and doctors. This doesn't happen overnight because it takes time to recruit them, but more nurses, more doctors is the way to reduce waiting times. But of course it's not just money and personnel. We all know the NHS can be better organised, and that would be something I would wish to push for as well.
And Kevin Yuill, can I just come to you on that, please?
And this is about mental health
Yes.
and students. Specifically students?
Yeah, well, just young people, students, you know, are having to wait 14 to 200 days to access sort of help on mental health. So just what's the Brexit Party's view on that?
I mean, obviously, we share the view that everybody else has, that there is a crisis inside the NHS at the moment, and that there needs to be more resources put into this. However, I see it from a slightly different perspective as well, because as somebody who has pastoral care for students, I do see a lot of these problems coming in, and particularly the one that concerns me the most is suicide. Student suicide can be a big problem. And I think we need to look into the issue of suicide much more rigorously than perhaps we have in the past. And my experience in dealing with these kind of situations one-to-one is that there is a mental health problem inside the universities, and it's born of a sort of pressure that students seem to feel when they're actually, when they're writing exams and this sort of things. I think in some ways, we actually need to teach a bit more resilience as well, because I think there is a problem that students are not feeling as resilient as they have in the past. And I do think that in actual fact, if you compare generations of students, I think this generation of students seems to feel these mental health problems more. And I think we need to explore why that is, rather than simply jumping and giving one particular thing. But I agree in general that the amount of funding that we give has to increase.
Okay, and Richard Bradley, can I just come to you on that?
The first thing, obviously, is that we need parity of funding, that mental health issues need to be treated equally with physical health issues, and I totally agree with Stephen on that. I do find this quite amusing. I'm sorry that the Conservatives are trying to throw money at something that they have hacked for the last decade. It's a little bit late. You should have dealt with it earlier. And if our students have a problem, it's the way we're constructing our universities and our education system, so that they become, you know, you're over-tested. It's a job that you're working towards rather than a learning experience.
It's true.
And if we change universities so that students, A, have financial security because we give them the money that the Tories took away from them, and we give them a quality of life and let them just learn rather than be pressured into preparing themselves for a job in the future in the environment, then actually we'll have less mental health issues, and then the funding that we put in the NHS can deal with the people with the real issues. We have to have a holistic review, and I'm glad, yes. Gentlemen are shaking their, nodding your head, sorry.
I am nodding.
It's a shame Bridget's not here, because Labour and the Tories between them have created the environment that we're in, and I feel sorry for the youth of today.
Can I just ask Richard, is there any specific policies that the Green Party have with regards to remedying the mental health issue in the UK?
You're asking what's in my manifesto, and
yes.
As much as I've read it numerous times over the last week, there are elements I forget. I know it's mentioned in there in terms of parity of funding. I know there is talk. I mean, 16, 17-year-olds we want to give the vote to. We want to give a future generations bill so that whatever act we pass is looking at what happens in the future. I cannot remember if there's a specific thing that says this is what we're doing for mental health for 16 and 17-year-olds. There are elements of society that suffer more than most. The LGBTQAI people have more mental health issues than most people in society. I could go on and on and on. All various parts of society have problems, and we need to focus on those and why they have the issue.
Can I just come to you, Stephen O'Brien, please?
Yeah, well, I've actually had first-hand experience of the waiting times. I'm still waiting for talking therapy on a personal issue of mine of an eating disorder. Now, there are things what can be done, simple things what can be done, like parity with physical health, which would cut down waiting times, like extra funding, which would alleviate pressure, and of course, like we can stop treating like mental health with a stigma. We have this stigma that it somehow has to be kept secret, that you're dealing with something mentally. Why can it not be shouted about and like talked about? I know we have all these campaigns about we have to talk more, but it's a little too late. We've had people who've committed suicide, and like the police force is in our manifesto that we would end putting mental health people who have mental health problems in prison cells, because that's not helping the problem. It's just they're getting institutionalised and they're not getting a remedy to their mental health. That sort of stuff needs to be dealt with urgently. I mean, Norman Lamb, who's an incredible MP and who's standing down for us this year, has tried many a time with the Green Party as well, where we try to have a cross-party platform of how we reform the NHS, and it's been knocked back by the Tories and by Labour time and time again, and at some stage we will have to come together as politicians of all stripes and work out what is the best way of funding the NHS and what is the best way of dealing with mental health in this country.
Okay, so this is a yes or no question, please. So we want a yes or no answer to get to grips with your exact policy on this. Will your party safeguard the NHS from exploitation by American pharmaceutical companies after a no Brexit or with a trade deal with the US after Brexit? We'll work our way down the line. We'll start with Richard and work our way up. Just yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, well, that's a bit of a loaded question, if you don't mind me saying.
Okay. Our second topic today then is housing, which was another important topic in our poll that the audience voted for. The Labour stance on housing is that they will introduce a £1 billion scheme to install sprinklers in high-rise buildings. They've committed to capping rent in line with inflation. They want to end rough sleeping within 5 years and will aim to build at a rate of 150,000 new homes per year for social housing.
And UKIP will introduce a 5-year residency qualification, which means that any overseas investor has to be a UK resident for 5 years before they can buy a property. This party believes that overseas buyers contribute to rents going up. Just a 1-minute question, gentlemen, if I may. We have, in recent times, basically had a tragedy with the cladding on buildings such as Grenfell, and that's obviously led to a big tragedy there. And in addition to that, we also had some issues with the accommodation at Bolton recently. What would your parties do to tackle this very serious issue? Can I come to Kevin Yuill first, please?
Yes, of course. The number one thing we do is build more housing. In Britain, you have a lack of housing, a ridiculous lack of housing that is born of hugely inflated land values, inflated by a lot of investment money. People are investing in homes, which I don't think is a good thing. I think it's much better to build homes for people to live in. And I think if we can do anything, what we do is ensure that many more homes are built. The targets that the Labour and Tories have are lamentably modest in this region, and I think we should build wherever, and that will bring me into a clash with on greenbelt land if needed be. I think basically there is a real shortage of housing. It's actually not as bad in this area as it is in other areas of the UK, which is all to the good. That's not to say we don't respect our green spaces, but I think just building a lot more housing is the solution to this whole issue.
Okay, well, let's come to Richard Bradley next then.
Well, of course, I disagree with that in its entirety. Well, no, not in its entirety. I've spent the last 3 years fighting Sunderland Council's plans to build on our green belt, with some success, not completely. And what I know of the planning system is that local communities have virtually no say. And in some ways, the council don't have that much say. The builders have far too much say in what houses are built where. That's wrong. So yes, we do need more houses, and we're talking 100,000 houses a year, but houses built where they benefit the community, not where just the builders make money from them.
Can I just ask though, Richard, what specifically would the Green Party do with regards to the cladding issue?
That is definitely in our manifesto, yes. The regulation around houses, they need to be safe, and deregulation over years of a Tory government and Labour before it has allowed builders to look at the economic cost of things rather than the safety element, and it specifically mentioned that within our manifesto that buildings must be safe and secure. You must be able to go into a building and know you're going to come out of it.
And if I can just come to Christopher Howarth on that point, please.
Cladding.
Yes.
Well, obviously, cladding that's unsafe should not be on buildings, any buildings, particularly high-rise buildings where it's difficult to escape from them. So although cladding per se is a good idea because it insulates insulates houses, and that's why a lot of it was done. Obviously something went tragically wrong, leading to a very, very tragic situation in London, and these need to be looked at urgently.
And does the Conservative Party have any specific pledges or ideas about how that can actually be sort of rectified?
Well, the building owners, so their ultimate responsibility to do this. I believe there is funding for local government where they are the owners of these buildings, but private owners of buildings with unsafe cladding, they're under an obligation to change that as quickly as possible.
Okay, can I just come to you, Stephen O'Brien?
Yeah, well, you'd ban the unsafe cladding. You'd also introduce, I think, where landlords are concerned, especially landlords who are unscrupulous, there needs to be some kind of landlord registry, and it needs to be compulsory. We have one on Sunderland Council. It does okay, but not brilliant, and because it's not compulsory and it's a Lib Dem pledge, has been for many, many years, that we would introduce a compulsory landlord registry, so we know those landlords are keeping their tenants safe and keeping a good standard of living in their homes.
Okay. According to the Office for National Statistics, around a third of men and a fifth of women aged 20 to 34 are still living with their parents. So if I can ask you a longer form 2-minute question. When most students finish university, they have to move back home. So what will your party do to build more affordable houses, in particular for young people? Let's go to Stephen first. I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, because I live at home. I live with my grandmother. There is just a shortage of affordable homes which delivers for younger people. There's not enough social homes. Liberal Democrats have pledged that we would build 300,000 homes per year. I would say that's slightly not ambitious enough personally, but it needs to be more. We also have to look at the fact that that councils need to start building again. And I'm glad that we've had confirmation in Sunderland Council that they're going to start building social homes and keep them social homes, because it was because of the Tories and Labour after that didn't control the situation where the right to buy has run roughshod over social homes for far too long, and it needs to be dealt with.
Okay, Christopher House.
Well, the cost of housing is the largest cost that most people have to pay in their lives, so reducing the cost of housing, the cost of house prices, is the best way to increase people's disposable income. We have a rising population, more demand on housing. The only way to bring down the cost of housing is to build more houses, and of course that brings you straight up into conflict with people who don't want to live near new housing estates for perfectly reasonable reasons. So changing the planning rules, particularly for sort of areas, sort of brownfield sites, areas, more higher density housing in areas, but building more houses so the supply of houses increases is the long-term way to bring down the cost of housing.
So would a Conservative government believe in more social housing, or building more houses and increasing the amount of houses out there for people to buy?
Personally, I think it's social housing has a role in the housing stock, but I don't think it should be the first port of call for the majority of the population. So the majority of building, I think, should be private building, either for people to own or to rent. That makes people more in control of their own futures, and they can move around. They can move, but of course, social housing will have a role in the overall housing appeal. But I don't think massive, great big council building new council estates, social housing estates. I'm not sure that's really what we want to do.
No, you mix them. That's an important point. You mix housing stock, social housing stock, with private stock, and the government's regulation at the moment, I think it's 10% of all new builds has to be some affordable or social, and that actually needs to be risen. It needs to be risen, and it should stop. And people like Gen 2 locally to hear what's meant to be for social housing have to stop deferring that 10%, because you're allowed to defer that 10% to another new place. Because if you look at Pennywell, because I used to live in Pennywell, I used to live in Pinkerton Road, they knocked the whole estate down, and it's led there for about 12 years, nothing is being built, and instead of social homes, gently we're building luxury homes. That is wrong.
Kevin Yuill?
Well, yeah, I can't really disagree too much with that. I think the specific issue is as I said in my first point, we need more homes. I'm not quite as bothered about whether they're council-owned or whether they're private. Whichever is more effective, they have to be affordable homes, though. And I think I agree with quite a few of the points that you made before, which is that when you're making homes for profit, there is a problem in that there is the land is at such a price that they will, and I've walked past building sites on my way back and forth, and they put in the cheapest spec materials that you have ever seen. And I just think the problem is that it's being built for a fast buck and not to provide housing for people. And that's what we need, is to think of it as homes for people. And we need to increase that number, not by 300,000, but I think we need an extra 5 million homes in Britain to sort of catch up to the extent, so few homes have been built in the past 10 years that I think we have to be much more ambitious than the main parties in this and push that agenda.
And what will the Brexit Party do for first-time buyers in particular?
If the price of homes comes down, I think then we will be able to actually, we won't need to do anything specific for first-time buyers. But I think in certain instances, I'm not opposed to, for instance, providing some sort of assistance for first-time buyers. It's also, it is a bizarre situation. I do think there's also a social element to this whole question, in that my generation, which I'm older than probably everybody,
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But we moved out as soon as we possibly could. I moved out age 17. As soon as I got a job, it was a possibility. And yet we tend to find this generation is staying at home for longer. And I wonder whether there's a social element as well, in that there's a sort of insecurity about actually going out in the world. And, I think that's something that we need to think about when we're looking at this question in a holistic way.
Richard Bradley, what would the Green Party do to build more social or affordable housing for young people?
The original question was about the number of young people still staying at home. And there are areas of the world where that is the accepted norm. And I do agree a bit with Kevin here that it's how society works. And as long as people are happy, that's okay. If you're happy living with your grandmother and it works for both of you, that's a good thing, because it improves society. We are of a similar generation. I moved out as soon as I could. I bought my first house as soon as I could. But that shouldn't be an essential. The quality of home is far more important. So whatever homes we build need to be at the right standard. Our homes will be to Passive House standard, which is a virtual zero carbon. It will have 90% less fuel bills than the current standard that house builders are building in Sunderland. That would change people's quality of life and address the climate emergency, which I'm quite disappointed we really haven't covered up till now at all.
Just hold on, it's coming.
It's going to come in everything.
Where would the Green Party build their new homes?
Well, the Green Party aren't going to build any homes. Let's be honest, we're not house builders. We will fund councils to build homes. And we'll fund councils to build affordable homes in the areas that are right, in the areas that are right for those communities. So Sunderland is a classic example that the council is trying to impose large estates on the green belt on the outskirts of town that would drive car use and would isolate societies from any form of entertainment or life. That's not good. Ask the people where they want the houses built and build them appropriately. There is more than enough room within cities to increase the density and to build houses where we grow the community rather than take the community away from the city.
And if I can just ask you, gentlemen, instead of a yes/no question, just to give me a figure on this, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll start with Christopher Howarth, is how many affordable houses are you pledging to build by the year 2024?
Well, the definition of affordable housing probably needs to be unpacked first. A lot of what are classed as affordable houses aren't affordable houses. Probably the thing to do is to increase the supply of housing overall to bring down.
How many would you build, though?
I don't think there is a direct pledge for that, but it's pledging to increase the supply of houses overall, which makes all houses more affordable.
Okay.
Stephen O'Brien?
It escapes me, but there'll be an element of the 300,000 homes per year which will be affordable. and social.
Kevin Yuill?
Well, the aspiration is 5 million. Obviously, I can't pledge that that's going to be built. It's a very high aspiration. But I think that's the way we need to think when we're looking at this question, is to aspire to build a lot more.
And Richard Bradley?
So our pledge is to give councils the ability to build 100,000 affordable homes a year, which would be 400,000. But on top of that would be private house building, and the legislation does need changing. That 10% figure that Stephen quoted is abused by house builders all around the country, and they aren't building it. So change the legislation, we would have more than that.
Another hot topic from our poll was the environment. Now, Labour's stance is that they will introduce a new Clean Air Act with a vehicle scrappage scheme and clean air zones across the UK. Furthermore, Labour have also committed to creating new national parks and an ambitious tree planting programme.
Yes.
And UKIP have pledged to legislate to bring about the use of biodegradable carrier bags and packaging and protect the green belt. So scientific evidence on climate change is overwhelming, and we only get one planet. So with that in mind, why do we have to rely on children like Greta Thunberg to turn attention to climate change? And let's come to you first, Richard Bradley.
Because they're ignoring science.
Okay, and what would you do then?
Our manifesto, we've been working on this for decades, not just the last couple of years. Our Green New Deal is 10 years in construction, and yes, we have to transition to a zero carbon technology. We cannot carry on using fossil fuels in the way that we do. Every time we emit greenhouse gases, we are polluting the planet, and Extinction Rebellion have got it right. We're putting our lives at risk as humanity. So it's time for urgent action. And yes, it's a lot of money we have pledged, but we pledge to take the action that is needed now to transition to a zero economy, and at the same time make the quality of life better for everyone.
Okay, Christopher Howarth, Richard Bradley seems to be blaming you for that, so what would you
everybody,
say?
I'm sorry, all of them, they're all in there.
Well, the Conservative government has been very active in the climate change, reducing emissions. We have subsidies for renewable electricity and things across the board. We've now pledged by 2050 to go to a carbon neutral economy.
You've cut back on those pledges for renewable energy.
Those pledges don't include air travel
Richard,
or...
Let's let Christopher, finish his point first.
So by 2050, but we have to be. We all live in the world. If we decide to bankrupt our own industry by making energy costs so expensive that heavy industry closes, this was a heavy industry town built on coal, in fact. If we decide to bankrupt our own industry, all that happens is we import things from other countries. So we have to do this sensibly. And my preferred way to do it is to look into technology, the technologies which we will have to do eventually, and make sure that those technologies are developed here, and the jobs that come from them are developed here, such as the electric battery plant in Nissan would be a good example of the sort of jobs of the future we should be looking into.
Okay, Stephen?
Well, simply put, it's like people are, from right-wing parties, are denying that climate change is happening. You have the President of the United States denying that climate change is happening. I think it's ridiculous. And you get people like Jeremy Clarkson disparaging Greta Thunberg, where she's actually shone a light on it. What we did in coalition, what the Conservatives undone, was to introduce a green investment bank, and the first chance they got, they scrapped it. Actually drove investment in renewable energies, which the Liberal Democrats are pledging, I think, 75% by 2025 and hopefully 100% by 2030. And that is getting rid of petrol and diesel cars as well and going to full electric vehicles by 2030. But it's also not the full picture as well, because me and Richard were discussing this prior to this programme. There needs to be investment in public transport. People need to come away from vehicles altogether and try and get, I think Richard would agree, try and get on the bus.
I would agree, but you've got a road building programme in your manifesto.
Those buses have to go somewhere.
No, that's not buses. It's not roads for buses.
Okay.
It's roads for transport, for cars.
Kevin Yuill, let's go back to the initial question. Why do we have to rely on Greta Thunberg to bring this issue to politicians?
Well, I mean, there are 2 points that I would make about it. First of all, I think we all agree that there is such a thing as man-made
Yes.
climate change or human-made climate change. I don't think anybody denies that anymore. Having said that, there are two aspects that I don't like about this. The first thing that I don't like is that all of the measures that seem to be proposed are attacking working people, people with low incomes. They're the people that are paying the regressive taxes that both of your parties are asking for.
Like what?
Like, for instance, tax on diesel. Tax on diesel hurts poor people. It doesn't hurt people on higher incomes because, of course, it's a much smaller percentage of their incomes. So I'm in favor of any kind of aspects to take. I think the real problem comes with big companies. The solutions should come with these big companies. They should be the ones paying for this. I don't think the people at the bottom, there's this air of unreality that we're not going to travel anywhere. Of course we're going to travel places, and I completely agree that we need better public transport, but we also need better roads. And we need people to move around, and we need to do it as cheaply as possible.
Can I just come to you very, very quickly? On that point that you made about poor people being affected the most, if you look at Newcastle, there's been arguments that they're trying to introduce a clean air tax in the city centre. And Dr. Yuill made the argument that people with older cars, diesel cars, will therefore be taxed more when they try to travel. What would you say to come back on that?
It gobsmacks me that you think we're going to tax poor people. I'm sorry.
You are.
The whole tax system needs changing. Our income tax system is not fit for purpose. So we would scrap the I'm working my way to. We would scrap the income tax system so that we share wealth more equally. Our business tax system is not fit for purpose. We would scrap the business tax system and make sure that companies pay appropriately. There is plenty of money there to pay for what is needed to deal with the climate emergency without taxing poor people. We are not taxing poor people. We'll borrow a lot of money, and we accept that we will borrow money, but we will not be taxing poor people. That's disingenuous.
Very quickly, because we
can I add, is to say, when cities like Newcastle do that unilaterally, it damages cities like Sunderland, because our bus services now are now mainly run by petrol cars where it used to be gas. We used to have cleaner vehicles, and the bus companies are pushing it. So instead of doing it unilaterally, what we should have done is come up with an idea where we could have done it as a combined region or as a Tyne Combined Authority, where we would impose a level of consumption tax on vehicles.
Okay, so we need to move on, gentlemen. So if I can just ask a 2-minute question, if I may, and I'll start with Christopher Howarth. Sunderland is on the coast. What do you guys plan to do locally to keep plastics away from our ocean and the River Wear?
Well, this is a global problem, plastics, and the UK is one of the best countries for it. The majority of the plastics that ends up into the ocean comes from countries in the developing world. But of course, we need to do our bit on that. Ending the use of single-use plastics, biodegradable plastics. This can be done in the public sector. Can when they're sourcing plastics, they can prioritise plastics that are renewables or biodegradable. But it's something. It's an individual choice. It's something that everyone can do. If everyone insists on buying biodegradable plastics, then people won't make single-use plastic.
Should that be the responsibility of the voter, though, to make those life changes?
Yeah, well, primarily, and everyone has individual choices when they buy things. If everyone decides to buy biodegradable plastic will be what companies sell. So I mean, that is something that every individual person can do. But of course, at different levels of government, same calculation.
If you go into a shop and say, I want to buy a glass bottle of water, that costs more than a plastic bottle of water. So is that not going to hit people the hardest?
Well, the more people who want to have biodegradable plastic, the cost comes down. So it's something that individuals can lead on. But making sure it doesn't get into the sea is one of the most important things. And on that, we are better than most countries. But there's much more that can be done.
And Stephen O'Brien, if I can come to you on that.
Well, locally, we can reintroduce a actual regular bin service. I think that's one thing that we would do. Another thing is it is partly personal responsibility as well. I mean, if I go into a shop and I buy a bottle of water, do I go for the cheapest option or do I go for the most expensive option? I go for the cheapest option, and that for me, it's my personal choice. But we can have regulation on companies where we can move towards more biodegradable plastics and such like. I mean, for instance, I think Iceland do a fantastic job on it because they're moving all their like non-recyclable plastics from circulation. So if companies like that do little bits, we can move on as a society.
And is that something that the Liberal Democrats will be looking to do?
Yeah, I mean it's in our manifesto. We want to move companies onto more biodegradable elements to facilitate the consumption of water and stuff like that. We introduced the 5p tax on plastic bags. I think that's been a success. We could do more stuff like that.
And Kevin Yuill, can I come to you on that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we're doing very specifically in this area is my colleague Glenn, who's standing for South Shields, organises beach cleanups with the Brexit Party, which we've had 3 very successful beach cleanups, and I think that's one thing that you can get local groups behind. I think we can get behind, everybody can get behind that. In terms of how to clean up plastics, I stick with my point that the big companies need to be attacked on this, not the consumer. The consumer is paying a 5p bag charge. What's the point? Now they're actually bringing in fact it was in the news today, that in fact you have to have more tax on these bags, and we're going to have to charge 70p for these bags. This is hitting poorer people. I mean, we may not be able to imagine it in this room, I guess, some of us, but you know, 70p on a bag of shopping is a big deal for somebody who's on income support. It's a lot of money. And I think that's one of the problems, is that all of these measures seem to attack poor people and not attack the companies. It cannot be beyond the ability of humankind to develop a biodegradable bag that can actually stay together until you get home with your shopping. So how is that so difficult?
What would the Brexit Party actually do then? You say that, you know, it hits poor people the hardest, but what would you actually do?
Well, I think we would certainly not raise the tax to 70p, and I think basically we should allow the consumer to decide whether they're going to pay for bags or not. I think most people, it's just an annoyance to have the 5p bag charge. Most people, you know, people who don't care about 5p, like myself, we all take bags that we reuse every week. I think most people do that. I think the less that is regulated around this, the better, but that doesn't mean that we all, as consumers, shouldn't make these choices ourselves.
And in your contract with the people, Kevin, does that have a specific pledge to basically go after those big businesses and actually tax them, you know, on things like that?
No.
Is that an aim?
Such? No, it's not spelt out in the as far as I know, unless I've missed it.
Okay. And Richard, can I come on to you on the same issue, please?
Ban them. That's simple. The question was single-use plastics. Ban single-use plastics. We shouldn't have them. We need to balance the financial.
An instant policy, or
it'll take time. I mean, you can't just walk in and say there's none now. We work towards it, but we need to balance the financial cost and the environmental cost of what we do in the world. And at the moment, you know, it's bloody cheap to produce. Very cheap to produce a bit of plastic to put your food in, but the environmental cost is phenomenal. And we can't carry on doing what we're doing, so we change it. And there are ways of dealing with it. There are, but as much as I'm agreeing with more than I expected to, you keep saying it's the poor people who will suffer. The poor people will not be the ones who will suffer. The poor people will be the ones who benefit the most. For example, give them a universal basic income and take them out of poverty would be a great start.
Yeah.
Can I just say, one of the things that, because I'm old enough to remember this, when I was young, when you actually had all sorts of liquids, you would buy a glass bottle, and we used to go around as kids with our little wagons and take these glass bottles, and they were all deposit. So you'd all get your 5 cents, because I grew up in Canada, and we'd get our 5 cents from this. And then they changed the policy, and this was the company deciding to do it cheaper. Now, we could have actually held this company to account and said, actually, no, you're going to keep on doing that. But instead, we've done these sort of little piecemeal things where we make it, the company gets away with murder, and the people at the bottom are paying the extra taxes on various different things, are paying extra money. We need things to carry our shopping home in with. There's no question about that. It's just, I disagree with sort of banning things. I don't like the ban-happy culture.
Richard Bradley, is a deposit return scheme something that the Greens would introduce?
It's not specifically mentioned in our manifesto, but there is validity to it, and I'm certainly not averse to it. And I know they're trialling it in Scotland. But we buy too much stuff, and we need to reduce the amount of stuff we're buying.
How do you do that then?
I like stuff.
Materialistic.
We've been conditioned to saying that happiness is found through buying things and through consuming things. Happiness is found in the world around us, and there are better ways of doing things. It's a big change to society. It won't happen easily, and there are some kind of financial levers that you'll have to pull to change people's direction. But we can't carry on doing what we're doing at the moment. It's killing the planet.
Okay, and to ask you a yes/no question on this issue, the IPCC has said that we have until 2030 to stop irreversible climate change from happening. Will your party legislate for net zero carbon emissions by 2030? Kevin, let's go to you first. Yes or no?
No, it's unrealistic.
Richard Bradley?
Of course.
Christopher?
2050.
Yes.
Is it not 2045 though in the Lib Dem manifesto? Is that not what you've pledged?
Yes.
Yes, it probably is. Sorry, but it's more urgent than that. I'd probably personally, it's more urgent.
But the party is standing on a policy.
Yeah, but I mean, exactly. But if it comes up in legislation, we're not going to back it, are we?
But it wasn't at the forefront of your manifesto. It doesn't appear till page 7 on the Lib Dem manifesto, the climate emergency. So the first 6 pages ignore
yeah,
the
but
fact
with the I mean, like.
Don't say you're the only party that's anti-Brexit, please.
No, I'm not. Well, we're the only UK-wide party, but
we're UK-wide.
You're not. It's a different. The Scottish Greens are a different party. What I was about to say is that we have to, like, we're the only party going to completely ban motor vehicles with petrol and diesel by 2030, but yours is straight away. Isn't it? Yours is 2025 or something.
2030.
Right. We're the only party, I think, within the main parties, pledging to have a green investment bank.
Okay. Christopher Howard, is 2050 not too late?
We have to look at this as the world as a whole, new technologies and things. Hopefully we can do it quicker, but legislating for something that's never going to happen doesn't really solve anything.
Right. Now we are going to cover Brexit in this debate because young people said that it was a key issue to them. I can see that you're quite happy, Kevin. Labour plan to renegotiate Boris Johnson's deal and put the negotiated deal up against Remain in the second referendum in 2020.
And UKIP are basically saying that they want to send no more money to Europe, no laws to Europe, and they want a clean break Brexit. So if I can just ask you a 1-minute question first of all, and I'll start with Christopher Howarth. How will your Brexit strategy improve the lives of young people in Sunderland?
Well, in 2016, Sunderland voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union, and we haven't left the European Union yet. So I think from a democratic point of view, it is very important that the referendum is honoured and we leave. The Conservative policy is to leave on the 31st of January, and then we can move on. We can give business certainty. We can move on with a strong economy and investing in public services.
And Kevin Yuill, can I just come to you on that?
Yes, I mean, I think the most important thing is that we honour the biggest mandate in British history, the biggest democrat. Nothing has been voted for more than has Brexit in 2016, and I think it's absolutely essential that we honour that democratic vote. I'm in favour of a clean break Brexit because I think Boris's deal is not as good as it sounds. It's a sort of May version 2. It allows, for instance, the fisheries will not have control over our fisheries. We'll not have with the European Court of Justice. We'll still have jurisdiction for a certain amount of time. So I'm very much for a clean break Brexit. But I think for the young people, I think democracy's extraordinarily important. And I think if we renege on this, on the 2016 referendum, or we do this incomprehensible Labour thing of whatever they're promising, it's very difficult to follow, then I think we will be betraying the people of Hordon and Sunderland South who voted for Brexit by 62.4%.
What about those young people though who didn't have a vote first time round?
Doesn't care about them. Doesn't care about them. I mean,
obviously everybody cares about them.
You clearly don't, because you're not listening to them. Majority of young people in this country do not want to leave the European Union. I do not want to leave the European Union.
Has happened.
And
these were all very good arguments put in 2016.
And I did. Democracy does not end overnight. It doesn't.
Well, it does if you don't. It does end if you don't.
No one can hear what's being said. Stephen,
we can have an election as many times as we please, and we can campaign for what we. Would you have stopped campaigning for Brexit if you'd lost? No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
So
yes.
why should I? Why should Nigel Farage wouldn't have? So why should I stop campaigning to remain in Europe? We're the only party. Well, one of the only parties who are going to revoke it. Are you going to revoke it? I'm not sure. No, we're going to revoke Article 50.
You've switched.
It's been damaged.
Just wants to not gone back on that policy now, though. She initially said that she was going to revoke Article 50 in the event of a Lib Dem majority government, but now she said that she's just going to continue campaigning for another referendum.
No, our policy is to revoke. That's our policy.
I thought this was a minute each.
No, in the Lib Dem government, yeah, but we're campaigning to have a Lib Dem government. That's our policy.
Right, okay.
So the question was for 16, 17-year-olds and how our Brexit policy is going to impact them. And the number one thing we would do is give them a vote. They should have a say. They should have a vote in all elections. And I would hope that they would stop this act of self-harm being imposed on us by the right-wing parties of this country. And just because, was it 28% of the population voted for something doesn't mean everybody has to stick with it for eternity. No. And it's become obvious over the last 3 years that whatever version of Brexit is put forward is bad for the economy and is bad for the people of Britain. And we keep asking MPs to vote for something that will harm their own constituency. It's no wonder Parliament is deadlocked, because MPs will not do that. And I admire Bridget for her stance for saying that if I vote for the bill being put forward by these parties, it will harm my constituents. Now, if you want to go ahead with that, if it's the right thing to do, we will vote again on it and tell us whether that version of Brexit is what you want. But we will give it to the 16 and 17-year-olds to vote.
Richard, can I just ask, if we don't respect the vote that the people had in 2016, doesn't that erode our democracy? Doesn't that set a dangerous precedent?
Yeah, no, we've spent 3 years in Parliament trying to deliver that
trying to block it.
Trying to stop it at every possible.
Trying to deliver that vote. And Parliament has been deadlocked because MPs realise how bad it is for the country. Now, if you're so adamant that you want to leave the EU, fine, we will do it. But we're going to ask you again on the specific terms, say, is this what you meant by Brexit? And if it's what you meant, then we have to do it. It would be a real shame. I don't think people would vote that way again.
Now we're going to move on to a 2-minute question now. Many EU and international students feel deeply concerned about what their place in the UK will be after Brexit. What can you and your party say to reassure those students that they can continue to study here in the event of a Brexit deal?
They're welcome. Everyone's welcome in this country. I don't think, actually, we were talking about this earlier, I don't think anyone should be in fear of staying or leaving, because we have the right. I think Boris Johnson has said that he will allow EU students and EU people already in this country to stay. And I think that all parties have a duty to lower down the rhetoric when it comes of stuff like traitor and attack their own members who are Islamophobic or xenophobic in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, Kevin Yuill?
Well, yes, I mean, I agree with that, but we weren't the ones that were actually calling everybody racist and stupid when they voted in 2016.
Neither was I.
I doubt you were, but there were certainly a number of people who, and I was called it in 2016, and it is a sort of a volatile question. On the other hand, people are very, very concerned about democracy, and I think it's right that they're concerned about democracy. And I think it's right that people are passionate about this. I think it's right that people are going to actually come out on the streets or do whatever they need to protect democracy. People died for, getting the votes. Women died to get the vote in the past, and the Chartists died to get the vote. So I think these things are passionate. But back to the question, because I see it in your face. The question is, what will happen to the EU students? That's certainly not our target. And we're very happy to have students, EU students, and students from all over come to this university and come to other universities. I think that's a very obvious thing. And I would say to anybody who is here and is affected by this, yes, I suspect all of us, including the Tories who are in government at the moment, would say that we respect the right of these people to stay.
Can the Brexit Party guarantee that they will have that right to stay? And in terms of EU students, if Britain leaves the European Union, will they, under the Brexit Party, have their fees put up to the international level?
That is a proposal. I'm opposed to fees in general, so I would be looking
Special interest.
I would be looking at that. I kind of agree with the comments that you made earlier about education. I don't think education should be something that's a route to a job. Education is a much more broad thing and is something that should have value in its own sake. I come from an education background, of course, so I am going to say that. But yes, I think, but I do think that everybody, I do believe in fairness, and so therefore I think there should be fees set for people in Britain, and fees, if there are going to be fees, then they should probably also, they should be set for people outside of Britain and equalised.
Christopher Howarth.
EU students who are at university in the UK at the moment have a legal and a perfect right to stay. There's people trying to say the opposite to scare people or put people in sort of unfounded state. There's doing nobody any good.
What would you say though to those students who are concerned about how welcome they're going to be here after Brexit?
Well, EU students have got EU students who are here at the university have got no reason to fear anything.
Okay, Richard Bradley.
We believe in building bridges, and I understand the concerns of the EU students. My niece is a student in Warsaw at the moment, and she's facing the prospect of her veterinary degree in Poland not being accepted in Britain if we leave the EU, and wasting 7 years at university there. I don't have an answer for them because I don't want Brexit to happen, and I fear for what this country will be like if we do push through Brexit and start dividing people, and I feel sorry for them.
What happens though if Brexit does happen? Where do the Greens stand then?
In terms of EU students?
Yeah.
We don't foresee a future when Brexit does happen, so I don't have a policy on that. I will do my damnedest to make sure that we stay within the EU and the students are welcome here all the time and made to feel welcome here all the time. We want them here.
Stephen, you wanted to come in before there.
Yeah, it's just to add, it's like when the Prime Minister of this country uses racist rhetoric, it absolutely enhances their fear. Yes, he did. He called Muslim women who wear burqa letterboxes. So that is racist language by anyone's definition of it, and it stokes up fear. It stokes up fear in people in this country who come from other countries.
Christopher Howarth is your leader. What would you say to Stephen there?
We wrote an article in The Spectator, if you read it, arguing that people should have the right to wear what they want. If you read the article, it's perfectly clear. He's making a very liberal case.
But calling Muslim women who wear...
Well, if you want to pick... He was a journalist for many years. If you want to pick words out of...
A journalist who wrote lies for many years.
He also
he wrote lies about Europe, about Brussels, to get himself a job.
I think you should read the whole... You should read the article in its entirety.
Do you not think using that kind of language exacerbates the situation of those students feeling unwelcome?
Can I come in as somebody slightly neutral here? In the sense that I think Boris Johnson is an utterly deceptive man and has lied to the people of Britain a few too many times. But I would defend him on that particular issue, because you cannot take a little, it's this call-out culture where you're saying, oh, somebody said something in 2002.
How do you feel
and
then?
you kind of think, well, let's leave that.
How do you feel then about the pact that your party has with the Conservatives where they stood down in those seats? Do you think that was the right thing to do?
First of all, it's not a pact. It was a unilateral action. It was not a great thing to do in many ways, in that many fine people had to stand down. Not only that, but I believe in giving people as big an option as possible. And I think you do democracy damage in that. But because of our first past the post system, which I think is a problem, and probably at least three of us agree on that, we were forced to do that. unfortunately, the Conservatives did not reciprocate, and therefore we're in the situation that we are in a constituency where I think the Brexit Party is completely electable, and I don't think there hasn't been a Conservative Party elected in this area since 1931. So they're getting in the way, if you don't mind me saying, Christopher. I think that's the problem, is that you know, I think those of us who are actually in favour of Brexit and not putting party before country are willing to actually sacrifice our party to put Brexit over the line. And, that's what
and finally, gentlemen, if I can just ask you a very clear yes/no answer on this question, and I'll come to Richard Bradley first. Will your party hold a second referendum?
Yes.
Kevin Yuill?
No.
Yes.
No, and voting Conservative is the only surefire way to make sure that doesn't happen.
Really?
We'll see.
You're not going to win.
Okay, so gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our time for this debate, but before we finish, can we get a 1-minute final statement from each party representative, please? And I'll start with Chris Howarth.
I'm standing in Hordon and Sunderland South because my family come from here, and because in 2016 people of Hordon and Sunderland South voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, and for 3 years the MPs from this area have blocked it in the House of Commons, which is why we're having an election in December, which not the most ideal time of year to have it. But given we are having this election now, this is the opportunity to make sure that Brexit is delivered, to make sure we have a government majority to push through the exit on January the 31st, to make sure democracy is restored, that we have stability for companies to invest, to produce a strong economy, and for a Conservative government to be able to invest in strong public services, the police, education and the NHS.
And Stephen, can I just ask you to go next, please?
Yeah, well, the only surefire way of stopping Brexit, revoking Article 50, is by voting overwhelmingly for the Liberal Democrats. If we get the majority government, we'll revoke it, and there will be no uncertainty. There will be no trade deals with the United States, which will put our NHS at risk. There will be no damage to the economy, like the IFS has stated. It is, and it is more than paramount that we get a local representative who understands local people and understands where their views come in, either council level or as well as constituency level. And for far too long we have lacked a constituency MP, and I for one would like to have one.
And Kevin Yuill?
You need to vote Brexit Party if you want to have Brexit. That's the key thing. We do what we say on the tin. We think that 62.4% of the population of Houghton and Sunderland South should be respected. We think that the majority should be respected, and we insist that only we can do that. The Conservatives, Boris Johnson should be dead in a ditch at this moment. He's not. I've checked the ditches. He's not there. He has, told us all sorts of tales. Don't forget that the Tories have been in power for 3.5 years over this entire debacle. And I think the only way that we're actually going to get anywhere to fulfill the clear wishes of the people of Sunderland and Houghton and Sunderland South and the entire country is to vote for the Brexit Party, hold Boris's feet to the fire.
And Richard Bradley?
The science is clear. We're in a climate emergency, and the next 10 years are probably the most important in our history. And whilst these people argue about Brexit, we have clear plans to deal with the climate emergency. So if ever there was a time to vote Green, it is now. But on the doorstep, I hear people say, I would vote Green, but you're not going to win, or various other reasons. And I say to them, well, we can win, and we've proved it. We elected the first Green councillor in the North East here in Sunderland this year. We more than doubled the number of our MEPs, and we will increase our representation in Parliament this election. So to all the people out there who say, I would vote Green, but I say, if you do vote Green, we will win. So please vote Green on December the 12th.
Okay, thank you. That's all that we have time for this, our My First Time debate. Thank you to all of our candidates for joining us today. And you can get in touch with your thoughts at Spark Sunderland on Twitter and use the hashtag MyFirstTimeDebate.
The candidates standing, just to mention, in Hordon and Sunderland South are Christopher Howarth of the Conservative Party, Bridget Phillipson of the Labour Party, Paul Edgeworth of the Liberal Democrats, Richard Bradley of the Green Party, Kevin Yuill of the Brexit Party, and Richard Elwyn of UKIP. Polling day is December the 12th. I've been Keith Bayes.
And I've been Daniel Hordon. Spark will be on air throughout the night on election night with coverage of all of the results. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.